Here we go. Hello, everyone. DKB here. I have a special guest in the building. It's my absolute pleasure. Probably one of the biggest, in my opinion, that we've had. I love the backstory, by the way. I was able to check things out. Probably second best only to maybe Jeremy Ruckert, who's actually out there playing on the field, right? But for those that don't know, pretty much, lifelong fan, if we want to call it that made it to the pro ranks in scouting and actually in our New York Jets department. And you were there for about 3 or 4 years, right?
Yes, sir. 4 years. Yep.
4 years. Awesome. And I'm trying to remember the time frames, but you were there. Was it Mangini?
I was 1998 till 2002. So I came on staff when Coach Bill Parcells was there, and it was an amazing 4 years for sure.
For sure. So I did have a question, and then we'll dive into things. So for those that paid attention to the headline, we're going to be breaking down some NFL draft prospects offensively. We know we have needs at quarterback and offensive line, so we got a pro in the building to kind of help us out with what he's seeing there. But when you consider, because from the fan side, we go on YouTube, we read all the articles and stuff. So I don't want to call it secondhand information, but obviously we're not pros. We don't necessarily look what we're going for. We don't necessarily know what we're looking for, excuse me. So from your experience, you mentioned being in the Bill Parcells realm. And then, of course, as you kind of developed and continued looking at it, what's kind of changed in these last 2 decades for you when it's come to looking at some of these talents?
The thing that's really changed, I mean, it's interesting you asked that, Dion, because the game's really stayed the same, but it's changed in a lot of ways. And the thing that's really happened for me is that when I go and look at a player, I need to see more tape today than I did even back then, because it's like that you have to make sure you're seeing as much of the full body of work as a representation as humanly possible. Now, obviously, when you're doing hundreds of guys, you can't see every game, but at least making sure you're seeing 3, 4, 5 games per season on each guy, because they do change, they do evolve. There are circumstances, there are things that cause the player to change on film. So you just have to, I find myself watching more today than I did back then even, which is something. It should be the other way around, but it's actually been the opposite for me.
I can imagine. I mean, if nothing else, the pool of players that keep trying to come into the NFL draft keeps growing tremendously. So, just by virtue of that, especially, it's always kind of a scout's dream, I've heard, to find that hidden gem guy in the later rounds or a UDFA. As we've been accustomed to, it's ironic that we've had more success with our undrafted free agents than our first rounders. But there was another interesting thing I wanted to tackle, and then we'll kind of dive into the topics. I had just actually heard the NFLPA president was asked a question about the scouting combine, and he was mentioning he thinks it's pretty much irrelevant. How much of a stake do you put in some of the measurables and the physical traits that we see come out of the combine and pro days when you're trying to break down the film?
Well, I think, Dion, that, to your point and what's been said about that, the way I look at the evaluation itself, it's like one of those old puzzles, we used to put together as kids, like all the different pieces, you dump it out of the box and everything's a piece to the puzzle. Nothing trumps the game film. That's number one. That's where you're going to find, because really being an evaluator and being a scout is very similar to being a private investigator. You're looking for clues, and all the clues you're looking for are on the game film, but there's also clues you'll find off the field. There's clues you'll find on the internet. There's clues you can find on social media. Teams. Hello? but teams are. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I think something had blacked out for me temporarily, but I hear you.
Okay, but teams are looking at they now have somebody employed from a social media standpoint. They're looking at that as well. Because there's a lot of stuff the players will put on the social media that can help kind of provide another clue or two to the overall big picture. And then to your point about the combine, the pro days, and all that kind of thing. I don't personally put a lot of stock in that stuff, but I definitely look at it and consider it. The big thing for me at the NFL Combine, and I've been to Indianapolis 6 times to the event, the thing that really stands out at the NFL Combine are the interviews. That's the big piece of it there when you get a chance to talk to the players and stuff. And be able to sit down with them one-on-one and really get to know them as people and not just players, and just kind of, it's like interview process. And that was what I wasn't involved in the interviews themselves. I was more the guy going to get the players for the people, the decision makers to do the interviews. But it's all very interesting to be able to look at each aspect of this. But at least, Dion, 95% of this is the game film, and I think there's more mistakes made by NFL teams from the end of the season to the draft than any other time, because historically 53% of first rounders are busts. And I think a lot of teams will start falling in love with these different measurables. They'll start, looking at all this different kind of stuff, a non-football environment, non-football game environments. And they'll be like, well, he runs around these cones in X amount of seconds. Well, that's fine, but you have to make sure the measurables translate to the game film and are often backed up by the stats.
Okay. I mean, that's it. It shouldn't be strange to any of us. I think that's been the consistent theme that we always hear, but the New York Jets history when it comes to the draft, and not just first rounders, but it hasn't been great to us by any measure. And kind of diving into the quarterback situation here a little bit, I seen a question that we had regarding area scouts, how much voice impact do they have when it comes to some of these smaller conference guys. Because that's essentially where we picked Zach Wilson from. And it's the same conversation. Everybody fell in love with the arm talent and him being able to throw a cross body and do all of these kind of things. So if it was you still breaking down the film, reviewing a prospect like Zach Wilson, and then, bringing it back to the coaching staff, how much of an impact do you feel like an area scout actually has in those situations?
Well, it depends if how much of their opinion is solicited. When you're sitting in the room, when it comes time, one thing I learned from my time with the Jets was when it comes time for your name to be called, that's when you give your opinion. And if your name's not called, you don't. You sit on the information, because by and large, I mean, when I was there with Bill Parcells and of course Bill Belichick and all those guys were on staff at that time, scouts were more or less, we were information gatherers. Gotcha. And that's our job, is to gather as much information as humanly possible, whatever that means, whether it's a game film, whether it's talking to coaches, whether it's talking to agents, whether it's talking to whoever. It's looking at injuries is a big part of it, compiling injury information. Scouts and assistants in the department and stuff are looked at as information gatherers. So all the information that we would have to begin with would already be in the system and in the computer system. So, like the coaches and the powers to be had already seen that. Now, if they want to take it a step further and call your name in the room, well, then you better be ready to respond and have something to say. But those are the times it's most appropriate to voice an opinion on a player that like you're asking.
Gotcha. Love to hear. Well, there's your answer to that, GVH. So let's go ahead and dive into the quarterback conversation, I guess, to kick things off. Most important position on the field, as they say, right? And I know you had some takes on the position recently, and I believe the name that's floating in my mind off the top of my head was Malik Cunningham as a prospect that you mentioned, considering the kind of offense that we're running, right? So from your perspective, can you tell us, for however in-depth knowledge you have of it, the kind of offense Nathaniel Hackett generally is going to run, and how that meshes up with this mobile quarterback that you're saying we need to acquire for this offense.
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of offense he installs, and I think a lot of it is going to be driven by the personnel. I think that the Jets have mainly on the offensive line. I don't know, and this is something I really write about a lot at SI Jets. I'm not too sure because most of the mainstream stuff I see and most of the stuff I see on social media, we see all this stuff about Aaron Rodgers and we see Derek Carr and we see all these different type of names floating around out there. But what I keep hitting on at SI Jets is this offensive line situation is really bleak. And that's so. I mean, you look at right now, for example, with the general manager in place, Joe Douglas. We have 7 offensive linemen currently under contract for 2023. About $3 million over the cap right now at this point. And when you look at those 7 guys. It's pretty dismal. I mean, there's really nothing to speak of at offensive tackle. Dwayne Brown will probably be a salary cap casualty, as we move forward. Max Mitchell, unfortunately, is dealing with the blood clot issue. We don't know his future. Mekhi Becton, Bill Parcells had a saying that 2 years in the NFL is a lifetime. He's been away from the game for 2 years at this point, and really it's very, very difficult for him because from a conditioning standpoint, that's going to be a huge challenge for Mekhi. Then you look at, the best of the bunch really is Vera Tucker. From there, it's kind of downhill. You got Laken Tomlinson. He obviously struggled last season. You got a couple backups, Drew Samia and Chris Glasser. This offensive line situation, getting to your question, is so bleak that I believe that, the Jets have to go with a mobile type of quarterback. And I think that Hackett's offense is going to be kind of, driven by that because you have to play to the strengths or weaknesses that you have on the table. And, I just can't even imagine an almost 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers standing behind what I just described.
Yeah, 100%. So Malik Cunningham, obviously he's going to bring those fresh legs. He's going to bring the ability to go out there and show the elusiveness that, to Zach Wilson's credit, has probably been the strongest part of his game, although he hasn't been able to do anything outside of that. What else could you see Malik Cunningham being able to provide in this offense? And do you look at him as more of sorry, I'm trying to think of the word that flew to my head, but is he more of a surefire starting quarterback right now, or is he somebody that still needs to develop, but he can do some things on the field if he was, pressed into action?
Well, I really like Malik Cunningham. I really do. I have the highest grade on him of anybody in the country coming out of Louisville. And, we all the noise right now, we have about Lamar Jackson. Well, Malik Cunningham at his time in Louisville had a higher quarterback rating, had a higher completion percentage, had a higher yards per completion percentage than Lamar did even at Louisville. So I really like him. He's a true dual threat quarterback. If you remember the name Randall Cunningham years ago, there's no relation, but at first take, when I watched him on game film, it's uncanny. Some of the things of how he moves around in the pocket and what he does back there. And so, I think that he's a guy that he's got great running ability. I mean, I'm talking about elite running ability. I'm talking about Justin Fields type of running ability, Lamar Jackson type of running ability. This is a guy who can beat NFL defenses on his feet and can create and extend plays by running around and making defenses adjust to him. He ran a very ball-controlled offense at Louisville, but he has several characteristics that translate very well to the NFL game. He's somebody that makes relatively quick decisions, which, of course, we haven't seen out of Zach Wilson. He places the ball nicely, good ball placement downfield. He doesn't throw a lot of dangerous passes, and he doesn't make take a lot of crazy chances with the ball. These are all things I think that translate very well, and of course, again, that elite running ability really translates well. It also to the game. As far as Dion, what you're talking about, as far as quarterback, as far as him coming in and just plugging right in and going, I think if he was pressed to do it, he definitely could do it. But one thing is certain, I've seen over the last few years, is that it's becoming more and more challenging for any rookie quarterback, and we've seen this, from all of them, to go into the NFL. There's such a huge transition. Even from the size of the football. The size of the football in college is smaller. Regulation football is smaller than an NFL football. And just the speed and the complexity of the ball, the game, and the defenses. A lot of times in college, we see these loose zone coverages and these receivers just standing there, here, throw me the ball. Well, that doesn't exist in the NFL. So you have to get used to the timing, the speed, and everything else. So could he do it? Yeah, I think he could do it. If I was sitting in the war room at the New York Jets and they called upon my name and said, well, do you think Malik can come in here and do this? I would say, yeah, I do think there's a good chance he could come and do it, because the thing that's most exciting about Malik Cunningham is, again, I keep going back to his ability to run. But make no mistake, he's not a run-first guy who's trying to play quarterback like a Trey Lance, for example. He's a guy who's a quarterback first who also is an athlete.
Sounds great. What kind of where would we need to potentially draft Cunningham in order to bring him into the building?
Well, that's an interesting question. I see him as a first-round talent, and that's way higher than a lot of people in the draft community have him right now. And so it just depends where he's going to end up actually going. For example, last year, too, when I was writing for SI Lions, I loved Brock Purdy coming out of in Northern Iowa there, or Iowa State, rather. I love him. And sorry, just so many hundreds of names go through my mind. It's an encyclopedia. I remember it was Iowa, but this happens after you've been doing this for a few years. But it's Brock Purdy is somebody I compare to 2002 NFL MVP Rich Gannon pre-draft. And obviously, Purdy wins the last player of the draft, and we see how that played out, with Mr. Irrelevant. So it's just depends where he'll end up going. Some people say, third, fourth round. Some people say, seventh round, undrafted free agent. It just depends who you talk to. But I have a first round grade on him. I did 8 games over 2 seasons on him in 2021 and 2022. And I know that, like I said, if my name were called in the Jets war room, I would pound on the table for him in the first round, because for me, he's my QB3 at this point, behind Ohio State, CJ Stroud, number 1. Number 2 is Alabama's Bryce Young, and number 3 I have is Malik Cunningham.
Gotcha. I mean, it definitely makes a lot of sense. I was just speaking about the situation as well. We haven't been able to have any kind of consistent success in the quarterback room. So as much as we've heard about wanting to draft like a pipeline at certain positions, like running back, safety, linebacker, potentially defensive line has always been a consistent one for us. The quarterback position feels like every time we potentially have one settle, we may ruin the situation with, an unwarranted game plan or something going awry. So I could definitely see us taking a pick on one. I don't know how high Joe Douglas will have that on his priority list. I know everything's kind of the selling point this season has been the veteran quarterback, Zach Wilson, getting developed. So it kind of almost feels like we'll end up taking a look at later round picks. So if Malik Cunningham, quote unquote, slides for whatever reason, then I think that might be a prime opportunity for us to jump. I think most cases and some of the mock drafts that people have been going crazy with, I've seen him flying off in like the mid rounds, like 4th, 5th. So that might be an ideal situation for us then. And it sounds like it would be a steal for us, at least based on how you rank him.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think people are going to be very surprised, because he has all the characteristics it takes to translate to the NFL game.
Outstanding. And so there was a point that you touched on, which I always try to bring it up. It needs to be harped on because I think a lot of people rely too much, of course, us not being pros on kind of what's being put out there. Mainstream doesn't always do it as much justice as maybe is required. But college offenses are definitely changing. Very much so, less pro style offenses being ran. The reads are, being a lot more simple, one read, pass and run situations. Teams don't necessarily try to throw it away so much. And the windows that you mentioned, soft, vanilla defenses are wide open. So a huge impact on that as well has been offensive line talent coming out. And it's a weird era in football where it's hard for you to find a veteran established presence on the offensive line that can come in and perform well. And then it's a 1 in a million shot in the draft almost for somebody that's not coming out of a pro offense. So diving into the offensive line situation, as you mentioned, we only have 7 guys under contract. Things do look pretty bleak. I'm still high on Mekhi Becton just from a talent perspective of what he's shown. But the injury history is a huge red flag for us. Even with Elijah Vera Tucker, people thought he could have had an all-pro season, but again, torn rotator cuff. You never know how people can come back from some of these injuries. They lose the strength that they had that made them stand out, different things like that. So
good point.
It's hard to look at this roster and say that we actually have a starting unit whatsoever. A lot of backup guys as part of those 7 people under contract. So a lot of people consider the bookends, our tackles, the most important part of the offensive line for us. And I know you've been doing some heavy studying on some of the guys coming out. So what does that situation look like for you with how you have some of those guys stacked up and who you think we should prioritize?
Absolutely. It's a great question, Dion. I think that, for me personally, I mean, this is one of the biggest head scratchers for me that there is with the entire organization because, respectfully, over the last 3 drafts, Joe Douglas has been at the helm. He's only selected 4 offensive linemen in the draft, right? So there's not been a lot of development there. There's been a lot of fringe guys brought in, guys that have been on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams, have been placed in backup roles. Listen, if you're on your 6th team and you're an offensive tackle, chances are you're not probably pretty good, at the game. There's been a lot of low budget moves, and Joe Douglas, in all fairness, has done a great job in other areas. When it comes to, you touched on at the beginning of the show, when it comes to some of the lower, the free agent guys, the guys off waivers, that type of thing, he has an extraordinary eye for undiscovered talent. That's kind of his thing. But getting back to the offensive line, I truly believe that the Jets need to go offensive line pretty much with every pick in this draft. They've got to replenish things. They've got to be able to that offensive tackle position mainly. I mean, I feel they got to go left tackle in the 1st round. I feel they need to go back to right tackle in the 2nd round. I would like to see them go back to left tackle in the 3rd round. They got to go center, I think, in the 4th round. Just keep restocking this type of thing because you're right. We don't know how Vera Tucker is going to come back from this injury. We don't know what's going to happen to Max Mitchell. We don't know what's going to happen to Mekhi Becton. Everybody thought, the talent was there, but, it's what's going to end up happening, down the road. And, you never know how Tomlinson, how his health holds up too and everything else. And, of course, at center, McGovern probably is going to end up walking, So and at center, outside the left tackle for a right-handed quarterback, center is really the most important position, I feel, in the offensive line because the center, makes all the offensive line calls and sets all the protections. So what are they going to do there with that situation? So, for me, picking at number 13, the Jets have the Tennessee tight end sitting right in front of him at pick number 11, I believe, with the need of offensive tackle too, because there's a very good chance that Taylor Lewan, their starting left tackle for years, is probably going to end up moving on from everything that's been reported and said about him. To me, my top left tackle on my board is Cody Mosh from NDSU, North Dakota State University. That guy's fun to watch. You want some fun tape to put on, pop some popcorn and put some tape on. Go on YouTube even, and there's lots of tape on him out there, and just watch this guy play tackle. I mean, he does it the way it's supposed to be done. I mean, for a man that size, his footwork is extraordinary. I mean, it's just like, you sit there and watch, just like Bill Parcells used to call him Jags, just another guy, right? You watch just guys, for days. And then all of a sudden, Cody comes on from North Dakota State, and it's just incredible. I mean, how nimble he is. He moves around. It he doesn't even cross over his footwork. I mean, this guy is dancing on the perimeter of the pocket like he's like a 300-pound plus, like a dancing ballerina or something, on the pot. It's incredible. And he's a character. He's a character too. He has no two front teeth. He looks like an offensive lineman. This is the first guy you want walking off the bus. Okay, as they say. I mean, this is the guy when you go to the opposing team stadium. This is the guy. And his handwork is very good, and he just makes it look easy. He's a tenacious, aggressive, physical run blocker. He's a guy that just absolutely gets after it. Just an astonishing playing speed overall. Everything about him is what you want to see from a left tackle. Should he slide past Tennessee, I would do jumping jacks on the war room table to try to get Cody Mach into the New York Jets organization. This guy would be just absolutely fantastic. He'll probably be off the board more than likely. The next real close is a guy I just wrote up for SI Jets, Anton Harrison out of Oklahoma. To me, he's Trent Williams 2.0. And I know that's a very bold statement, but when you go back and watch him on film, 2 straight seasons, he's dominated every time I've turned him on. He's about as close to textbook as I've seen out there. He's a very skilled technician. He's a guy that holds down that left tackle position, the blind side, as they call it. They even made a movie about the blind side, right? He holds down that blind side with ease. He's got fast feet. He's got good playing speed. He even has a short area burst, which I think is the first time in 40 years I've ever used the word offensive lineman, a short area burst in the same sentence. The guy's an extraordinary. He's an extraordinary athlete, and he's aggressive. He plays with an edge. He has a heavy anchor. There's nobody in the National Football League or in college, for that matter, that's going to bull rush Anton Harrison. He's a guy that holds down. That if people try to bull rush him, he can stop those attempts. And as a run blocker, he's got a very mean streak. He plays, like I said, with an edge. He does a real nice job. He understands the art of run blocking. He's able to seal off, lanes. He's able to do those types of things. Long arms, equally distributed power as far as upper and lower body strength. That's a guy who I have really targeted for the Jets at 13 is Anton Harrison. All the things you hear out there about the other names, the big names, the Peter Skronskys from Northwestern, the Paris Johnson Juniors from Ohio State, all the stuff that you hear about all these different types of guys. To me, is just, even a Broderick Jones, from Georgia, those 3 guys, I'm not seeing it on film at all. The whole draft committee is going bonkers for those 3 guys I just mentioned. Can you hear me okay? Dion?
Hey, there
Can
you
you
go.
hear me?
I think I
Yeah,
lost.
sorry. Yeah, I'm in Key West, Florida, so I'm out in the middle of the ocean here. So I think it's at my end. Ever since Hurricane Ian brushed up against us a few months ago, the internet has been awful down here. So I do apologize.
No. All good, all good. I know we, at least from my side, it cut out right after you were kind of talking about the big three, Broderick Jones, Paris Johnson, and them that you heard everybody else speaking about. Essentially, it sounded like you don't agree with what you've seen on film so far for them being as highly rated as they are.
No, not at all. And that's really what comes down to is what, it's scouting is not that difficult. I simply just write down what I see on film, and the players really write the reports for you as a scout. You just watch the players, and what you're looking for mainly are positive and negative traits and attributes and tendencies. And so, the big three guys you touched on, Broderick Jones and Paris Johnson Jr. and Peter Skronsky, they just don't have what it takes at this point. They're not plug and plays. These guys are not Rashawn Slater coming on Northwestern like we saw a couple of years ago that just became an overnight All-Pro. That's not who these guys are. These guys are more developmental guys because the two most important things three things you're really looking for from an offensive tackle standpoint. You're looking at the lateral foot movement. You're looking at playing speed, lateral foot, speed, and you're looking for hand placements. And I'm sorry. I mean, I've watched games over 2 seasons on Skronsky and Broderick Jones, and both of those guys look like guards who are trying to play tackle in an emergency situation in a game. They do. Their footwork is just. I mean, Broderick Jones to me has the most upside of those big three because Broderick Jones reminds me a lot of a very raw and unpolished version of Chris Samuels, if you remember him, the big offensive tackle in Washington. He's got some of that too. I mean, he's got a defensive mentality. He plays like a linebacker. He's very vicious. But his technique is very different. It's very unorthodox. He blocks like a boxer. And his footwork. And the thing of it is all three of these guys, the big three, their footwork leaves a lot to be desired on the perimeter. And, so I just don't see it with those three guys at all. But again, getting back to, if they can secure a guy like a Cody Mach from NDSU or an Anton Harrison the first round, those will be that, either one of those guys will be a huge win for the Jets at left tackle.
Got you. And kind of leaning on that. So question-wise, are they easy enough traits if we end up seeing these guys stick as like being at the top of the pack as we see the offseason progress? Is something like footwork, since hand placement doesn't sound like it's necessarily the hugest issue for them, is that something you see being more easily correctable at the next level? With the professional support that they get, and maybe that's something that you can kind of weigh the risk and reward on, or how do you factor that in?
Well, it's interesting. When I was growing up as a little kid, I watched a lot of NFL films. And even before I knew Bill Parcells or worked on his staff with the Jets, when he was with the Giants, he used to have this saying. He said, if they don't bite when they're puppy dogs, they're generally not going to bite. And when you watch these guys, they really are what they are. And I think a lot of mistakes get made by, like my NFL mentor, for example, my scouting mentor, a man who has 4 Super Bowl rings, it's, a lot of teams, and he's run draft rooms. And, a lot of teams get into trouble because they say, well, we'll just coach them up, and a lot of times that doesn't work because these guys are what they are. Then once they get paid, they really are what they are. In some of these things, I mean, it's almost like they've been doing this stuff since they were kids. Some of these tendencies that they have. For example, Peter Skronsky. Okay, Peter Skronsky has a glaring tendency on game film to once he rocks back, he kick steps out in the pass protection. He's got and a defender comes into his body. He comes, they engage hard. He has a glaring tendency to stop moving his feet, and he's very susceptible at that point of getting beat. through the back door of the pocket or back inside on an inside spin or a swim or a rip move or so, and back inside. And the unfortunate thing is for some of these guys who have these different, issues like Skronsky and Paris Johnson Jr. and Jones, Broderick Jones from Georgia, is there's no time, there's no ramp up period for these guys. They're from day one, boom, they're playing against the best pass rushers in the league coming off that side of the line, who can smell blood in the water, who are going to watch the film and are going to see this, and they're going to test these guys every which way they possibly can, and they're just going to set them up all day long and see what they have for an answer. So, are these issues correctable? Well, they're only correctable if the players are open to receiving the coaching. If they don't think they know more than the coach, which is something going back to the combine, is something you hope to try to, ascertain that information when you talk to the players, like how humble is he? Can he receive coaching? Coachability was one of the critical factors that Parcells had of scouting was he coachable? If the answer is yes, sure, Dion, you got a chance to maybe correct some of those things with good coaching. If the guy comes in and he's a know-it-all, and he's a first-round pick, and he's a big man on campus, and he's a guy that, now is a multimillionaire, and he looks at the coaches like, he makes 5-10 times as much as they do, it could be a problem. So it just depends what the mentality of the player is. Everything is correctable if the player is open the receiving direction, for the most part. Some guys are more athletically gifted than others, but, good coaching can definitely, work some of those things out. But in the first round, I think you just have to get a plug-and-play player. You can't get a project. A guy in the third round, like a guy like who I was very high in 2021, I actually gave a first-round grade to, was out of Maryland, was Jalen Duncan, the big left tackle there. He actually had a worse 2022 game film. I slid him down to the third round as far as a value grade at this point. But he'd be a perfect guy, what you're talking about, Dion. A guy that has lightning fast footwork, which is super intriguing. But he's another guy that stops moving his feet once he engages in contact, and defenders take advantage of him. A guy like that, sure, in the third round, that's the round to take those guys. Is a high developmental round, with a high upside. That's the round in the third round to take those guys. But the first round, I think you got to get somebody in there that actually knows what they're doing from day one.
Gotcha. Okay, that's perfect. I was actually going to ask one of the follow-ups that I had in regards to, I know the technicality of the positions on a whole nother level compared to, some of the other spots you can grab talent at. But I was going to ask, what would be an ideal spot where you start taking a look at these guys that, take a DeJuan Jones, and I kind of want to ask you about him as well. Freak of nature, right? Mekhi Becton build 6'8". He's playing at 360. I've heard things about him having nimble feet and stuff, but I'll kind of rely on you for this. But it sounds like the third round and beyond is the most comfortable spot, at least in your position, to take a guy where maybe he doesn't have quite necessarily the technical refinement in maybe most areas. Maybe it's just a few key areas like leverage, hand placement, things like that. But give us your thoughts on a guy like DeJuan Jones, who people are saying, maybe he skyrockets into the first round, but it seems like he's comfortably in the second or third, which may be a perfect spot for us to take a gamble on him.
Absolutely. That's a great point you bring up, Dion, because I have DeJuan Jones being mocked to the Jets in the second round. I think it'd be a perfect fit for the Jets, the big kid from the Ohio State, right? He's a very interesting guy. There's a lot of hype around him right now because of his size. He's got the wingspan from a guy who's like 7'5". It's crazy. It's a historical wingspan measurement at the Senior Bowl. He's very interesting. The one thing about right tackle, though, or offensive tackle, it doesn't matter if you're 6'8" or if you're 10 feet tall. It doesn't make any difference because the height doesn't really play into the advantage at all at that position. Again, it goes back to the lateral footwork. It goes back to foot speed, and it goes back to hand placement. As far as your success rate at the offensive tackle position, as far as having those components down cold. And the thing about, Jones is that, he's a tenacious run blocker. He gets after the run blocking pretty good, and he's pretty decent in pass protection. Of course, the right side, you don't deal with as good as pass rushers maybe as the left side does. But now more and more teams are starting to flip these guys from side to side. We see it all the time in college. We see it in the pros. We see guys like Aiden Hutchinson in Detroit jumping from side to side all the time. So now the game's starting to change a little bit more in that aspect. And the big concern about Jones is because he's so tall with that center of gravity that he has, that, he can be, if you work him out to the outside edge, he is very vulnerable to being beat back inside, which is a huge concern I have with him. That, so but he is a very interesting. The value is second round on a guy like Jones. I think the Jets would be very well served. Another guy that I really like is I think he'll be long gone by the second round is out of Tennessee is Darnell Wright, who basically handed it to Will Anderson. But when they faced against Alabama this last season, he's I have to believe that a team like Cincinnati, after the troubles we saw them have at the right side of the offensive line, I think maybe they grab somebody like that in the end of the first round. But DeJuan Jones, yeah, he very well could be there in the second round, and they got to do something. They got to get people in here ASAP, because otherwise it won't make any difference whatsoever who's behind quarterback, because it will just be a revolving door of guys getting carried off the field.
100%. You did say something that interested me in terms of how heavy we may need to hit the offensive line in this draft. And maybe it's not ideal from, the use of our capital. We'll have a bunch of guys coming out around the same time, 4 years from now, essentially, if you take out the first round, for guys that will need to try to figure it out. But I would say offensive line, 5 starters is probably one of the spots, probably one of the only spots on offense where you really do need to probably plug in 1 or 2 resources in the draft, every draft, essentially, to make sure that you kind of keep the cupboard stocked. Does it make sense for them to try to hit, no matter the position, the offensive line early and often? Or do you see us kind of trying to mix things up between weapons, offensive line talent, maybe trying to plug in some key defensive guys?
Well, I know for if I was in the position of making the decisions, I would go offensive line every single round. No, but from an analytical standpoint, looking at Joe Douglas, that's not his nature. That's not what he's done historically. Like we talked about before, I touched on, he's only selected 4 offensive linemen in the draft since he's been the general manager of the New York Jets. So he's not a big fan of taking offensive linemen in the draft for whatever reason. But I don't think he's going to have a choice, to be honest with you, because, I just can't see any big name quarterback looking at that depth chart and saying, yeah, trade me there, please. I just can't see that happening. So he's going to have to commit to doing that. And the answers will not be found in free agency, because the salary cap is such a mess at this point, that with a team being $3 million over the cap, and people the first response to me will be, well, we'll just restructure some deals and we'll cut some veterans and so forth. That may be true, but you have to replace those players. I mean, so at today's going rates, and then also, the Williams brothers, they're looking for new deals, and that's a big one. Quincy's a free agent. He's probably gone. I mean, especially with the kind of deal we saw down, the linebacker down to Baltimore just get the record deal, and there's also other areas too. There's another 23 free agents that played with the team in 2022 that are, free agents now too, that he's going to have to address. So the answers will not be found in free agency. I mean, these offensive linemen are making bank in the free agency pool, and $5, 10, 15, $20 million a year is not out of sight. And the Jets just don't have that kind of money. So it's going to have to be through the draft. I don't see how any other way they can possibly tackle this or address it but through the draft. And that offensive lineman, like I said right now, it's very, very possible that at the end of the day, once we go through free agency, let's say, the Jets, like Dwayne Brown is one of those guys that ends up getting cut as a casualty, salary cap casualty, to clear some cap space. And let's say, Max Mitchell, we still don't know if he's going to come back from the blood clots. That only leaves Mekhi Becton as the only offensive tackle on the offensive line under contract, and he's been out for 2 years. I mean, they've got to do something. They've got to go after these offensive linemen in the draft. I don't see any other way around it.
100%. Yeah. I'm definitely very much so on board. I don't know how much we'll end up investing there. Obviously, you got to try to throw darts at some veterans.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of see what happens there. I know we've been chasing, Ryan Jensen at center sneakily for years. So we'll see what Joe Douglas has cooked up there. But have you ever seen, I guess, kind of playing off this situation during your tenure, at least while you continue kind of investigating, prospects? Have you seen a team commit to like a essentially a full youth movement at like the offensive line and just developing things up from the ground?
Not so much. It's obviously the skill positions are there. I mean, that's what Joe Douglas did last year with the draft, and he's been doing, and also free agency. With the tight end situation, he's stocked that up pretty good. To the point where it's hard to even get Jeremy Ruckert on the field. He stocked it so well. The receiver situation, it's a nice receivers room. The running back situation, solid. I like what they've done there. The skill positions are set. I haven't seen a team do something like that where there's just a youth movement like that, but I don't see any other way around this. I think they're going to have to do it because it's the only way with the salary cap constraints they have. It's the only way they're going to be able to even field an offensive line come September.
I mean, I would love to see it. I don't think it's too far-fetched. I mean, we've seen the Panthers do, a full defensive, draft class. So, we could break the mold and try to do the same thing with our offensive line. And if anything, again, I think it'd work out in our favor. I don't see too many veteran talents coming in and just excelling anymore in the league with the way things are trending. So it'll be nice to have some not only youthful legs, we get that young physical talent, and we get a team that could potentially try to grow together. And if Keith Carter is as good as a lot of us seem to be, then I think we'd probably be able to maximize on that early. But for me, and I think I stand out a little bit differently than most people with this, I think the center, as opposed to the tackles, are honestly the most important position on the offensive line to me. So I know you just started kind of diving into them, but can you discuss a bit who you had at number one and what makes him stand out from the rest of the pack?
Absolutely. John Michael Schmitz is a guy that I've been paying pretty close attention to. And I think just, that's one that I think the NFL draft community and I are on the same page about. It seems like he's center one across the boards on every single type of mock I'm seeing or anything. I don't know if there's anybody else or if you've seen anything different. But he's a guy from the University of Minnesota that's very interesting. To me, he had a far better 2021 game film resume than 2022. I had a first-round grade on him coming out of the 2021 season that I've actually downgraded to a fourth-round grade at this point because he did show, and that's what I'm talking about. The more film you watch, the better, and you have to be willing as a talent evaluator to swallow your pride and say, okay, here's some things that, maybe I didn't see as much or he didn't do as much of, or the level of competition wasn't, what it needed to be or whatever. But John Michael Schmitz is a very interesting guy. I think that, if the Jets were able to get him, whether it be the third or fourth round, I think would be a very good pick for them because he's a very smart football player. You can see that by how quickly he picks up like stunts. Inside when guys are crossing each other's face and trying to hit the gaps and stuff as far as defensive linemen are concerned. And he's a guy that has a wrestling background. He lettered in wrestling in high school, and he blocks like it. He's a mauler. He's a guy that gets after it. He's very unselfish. He's a guy in pass protection that helps out the guards quite a bit. He's got a good enough anchor to be able to hold down the fort if he's bull rushed. He's not going to make a living go one-on-one against NFL offensive linemen because I think even though he's got a very strong lower body, his physical strength is not equally distributed. He's got a much stronger lower than he does an upper. As far as, so he is a guy that could potentially become, even in college, he looks like he gets a little overwhelmed at times, overpowered against like a Purdue or something like that this last season. But he's a very interesting player. Another thing too is, centers have got to be able to get out. And I like your observation, Dion, about center being the most important, because it really is. I mean, the first thing that Bill Parcells did just about when he got in the building when I was there was bringing Kevin White. I mean, everybody's like, well, what's he doing there? And well, the center is that important, because you're right. I mean, they set all the protections. They everything that happens, that the line calls and everything else. And he's a guy that I have circled for the Jets. He's a guy that I think that he had a very strong Senior Bowl to go with it. And, I think he's somebody that could, really have a strong chance as a rookie, kind of like we saw Tyler Linderbaum last year with the Ravens when he stepped in from Iowa. I think he's a guy that, doesn't have Linderbaum's once-in-a-generation playing speed. Actually, he's the fastest center I've seen in 40 years, the guy for Baltimore. But John Michael, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's just like Jalen Duncan's probably the fastest offensive tackle I've ever seen. These guys are getting just ridiculously fast on game film, some of them. But I think that John Michael Schmitz is a guy who, shows a lot of the attributes you're looking for from a center position to give yourself the best chance, because again, they're tough to find. And that's why, I don't know if the Jets should be so quick to let McGovern walk, because I understand he's a $9 million a year plus cap guy, but hey, if like I always say, you can have the best quarterback in the world, the best receivers, the best running back, and the best defense, but if you don't have any, I mean, it all starts up front. I mean, if you don't have the offensive line, you don't have the center position stuff. I mean, we've seen some of that. I mean, I think over the last, since Joe Douglas has been there, I've ran for SI Jets. The Jets have given up, I think, the third most sacks in the league since Joe Douglas has been the general manager. So, we've seen the kind of damage these defenses have done to us based on the fact that, the protection isn't what it needs to be. And so when you got a guy like McGovern who's been durable, a guy who knows this, I mean, obviously it's a new system now with Hackett, but I think you almost have to just, maybe pull him aside and say, please, just please don't go. We love you. We'll show you the love too. And that, it's really underrated. I think they really got to make a strong play for McGovern before he leaves, if they can find a way, because if that center position gets compromised and they just bring in, like Parcells said, a Jag, just another guy, if they just bring some guy in there, some guy's been bouncing around the league or something, that could be a nightmare.
Yeah, 100%. I know a lot of people focus on like the Aaron Donalds of the world that are, playing the nose tackle position and things like that. But there's plenty of other game records just from the classic builds that are out there destroying people. I mean, we have one in our own division in the AFC East with the Dolphins. And I can't Wilkins? I don't think that's his name. I can't remember him off the top of my head. But either way, we need somebody that can either I feel like handle somebody that has that all-around ability like an Aaron Donald, or they can stand up to a guy that's, 340 pounds, or, just get out there and make sure we have the proper protections, which I think was a huge knock on McGovern over the last 2 years, is that we still giving up plenty of sacks. And with him being kind of the mastermind of the offensive line, especially considering the consistency there, he's kind of been dinged a lot for that. But we also have to remember he's had a rotating cast of people for forever. So, there's a reason people say chemistry is, one of those vital components of the offensive line. And you can't just plug in all pros as you please there. So if you see a world where we do get to keep Connor McGovern, would you still take the risk, or not the risk, but would you still place the investment in trying to grab somebody like a Schmitz out there to let him sit behind McGovern for however long?
Absolutely. I think that's the ideal situation, to your point, I think is the NFL game, we go back to it, I touched on earlier, is so much different than the college game. I mean, there was a great piece this last year. I forgot who wrote it, but you can probably easily find online when Kayvon Thibodeau, the big-time pass rusher from Oregon with the Giants across the way here, He talked about that transition going from the college game to the NFL game and just what an eye opener it is. And I mean, that's a guy like Thibodeau. Okay, that's so speaking, and so that carried a lot of weight with me. And I really appreciate that perspective. And so I think that yeah, there's the once in a generation guy like Sauce Gardner who just steps in and looks like Deion Sanders. There's a Garrett Wilson, once in a while type of guy that does something like that. But by and large, I think the transition, and we're seeing this across the boards, some of these rookies are having just a really hard time. I mean, even the blue chippers, the top 10, top 20 guys are having a more of a difficult transition into the pro game. So if you could do, to your point, Dion, where you can keep a McGovern even for another year and draft a John Michael Schmitz and have him just kind of like learn and see. And, it's kind of like if you ever watch the Hard Knock shows, it's like you see like, some of the stuff where, like the Cardinals won, my wife and I, we just got done watching, where Watt is kind of like, mentoring some of the younger guys and into the finer points of the game. And like Zaven Collins and those people out there in Arizona, if John Michael Schmitz could sit behind and kind of learn some of that stuff, because that's the biggest transition. I remember even when I was with the Jets, some of the rookies with, the smart ones, and they'd be staying after practice and they'd be working with some of the veterans and asking if they can kind of work with the hand techniques and different things, because there's so much artwork that, it's so artistic at this level, like all the different moves and intricacies and all the different things that you see. And, this is a way different game than the college game. This is just way, way different, where maybe you were the big deal when you were in college, but now it's like you're just one of the guys. I mean, everybody's fast. Everybody's big. Everybody, it's a different. I remember watching RG3 when he came out of Baylor, when he was with Washington the first year, and his whole game was running around, doing all this stuff. And the first preseason game against Chicago, he tried to hit the edge and run around the edge like he did at Baylor, and the Chicago linebacker just blew him up. And I'll never forget the look on his face. His eyes looked like you seen a ghost. It's like wow. Linebackers can run like that. RG3, they can, and so I think if to your point, getting back to it, I think that would be an ideal situation, and absolutely the Jets should make the investment in a John Michael Schmitz, because everything starts up front. Like I've said, I mean, it's not glamorous. Nobody wants to, everybody's not going to jump up and down when you hear, oh wow, we got an offensive lineman. It's not as glamorous as some of the other positions. But without the offensive line, I guarantee this team will reside in the basement until they get one, because you just have to have the offensive line. It all starts up front.
Yeah, fully agree. I think anytime we've moaned and groaned about our offenses over the years, it's always been at the, unfortunate impact of the offensive line not performing, and usually across multiple positions for us. There was a final question that I had for you, going back into one of the prospects, Cody Mauch. I know you have him at tackle. I've been seeing some experiments. Obviously, Senior Bowl, he's been playing a lot of different positions from guard to center. That's been going there. Could you see us trying to hedge our bet a little bit with some of the versatility that maybe some of these guys show, where we maybe do grab a Cody Mauch in round one? Potentially he plays center if we feel like we can't find a better center prospect, or we lose out on the guy that we really want to target, and we do, follow through with picking up some tackles in the second or third round. Do you feel like Cody Mauch actually has that ability to go out there and be an effective center for us?
That's interesting, because he hasn't done it. Really, I mean, he's been a tackle. I think they're moving around at guard, at center. I think there's I don't know. It seems like they really want to protect these other big name three guys, and they're kind of experimenting with him to see what he does. I put the rabbit quotes up around it. But yeah, he'd be a great pick. I mean, if the Jets are fortunate enough to get Cody Mauch, he makes the Jets instantly better. And that's what this is about, is increasing your talent level. So whether he's playing tackle, he's playing guard, he's playing center, and wow, what a wonderful thing to have that kind of versatility. We saw that with Vera Tucker. He's moving around, he's playing guard, he's playing tackle, he's doing all this kinds of stuff. That's a wonderful trait to have, that I think increases his value even more. So he is showing some he got good reviews at the Senior Bowl. Now that's the Senior Bowl. That's practicing. That's not live game situations. But the thing that stands out to him is he's just a pure football player. He's a guy that you could have put a leather helmet on back in the 1930s with that face that only a mother could love. He's a pure football player. He's a guy that just wherever you put him, you are better, because he brings like I was pushing as hard as I possibly could through my keyboard last year for the Jets to take Ikem Awanku, that went to Carolina. This guy's an aggressive, tenacious football player that helps set the tone on your offense. He sends a message to the defense like, hey, you know what? I'll hit you harder than you'll hit us. I can tell you that much. And it's an attitude. It's having an offensive lineman who has a defensive mentality, like Chuck Knox used to talk about, the coach with the Seahawks. When you can get that type of a lineman, you got to send the card in immediately. And Cody Mock, that's definitely him. And, maybe he starts out a guard or center, and then he slides out to tackle. You just have a tremendous versatility that Anton Harrison, for example, doesn't offer. Anton Harrison isn't playing center. So to your point, I think that'd be a great pick for the Jets.
Yeah, it might be in the same vein as kind of what we could, like we mentioned with Smits. He would have McGovern to look to in terms of versatility. Nobody's done it better than Elijah Vera Tucker. So that could be something he could try to lean on. Granted, AVT is still young, but we've seen him do it at a high level. So, the productivity is there. I want to say we ran through all, if not most of all of our prospects, but did you have anybody else out there we should kind of keep our eyes and ears on, and any kind of final parting thoughts?
No, I think that's it for now. I mean, that's really the focus of where I've been at with the offensive line, is just looking at all these different types of tackles, mainly because of the needs the Jets have there. It's to me that's where they've got to strike in this thing. In the weeks to come, I'm probably going to be looking at more centers too, and I'll be writing about them for SI Jets. But at this point, I think that's really where the focus needs to be. And you brought up that DeJuan Jones. I think that's a really interesting proposition for the Jets in the second round, but not really, not for this team. I just don't see any other. I can't see the Jets doing anything besides offensive line. I just can't. When I close my eyes, I just can't see it.
It's fair. I think most of us feel the same way. Again, it's hard to pencil in anybody as a solid option right now that's healthy on the roster. I guess I'll put that asterisk out there before people try to, spit vitriol. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's been enlightening kind of hear from a pro's perspective, kind of what's going into a lot of these evaluations. I know a lot of people, at least that I've spoken with, that are familiar with like articles and stuff that you wrote. They mentioned there's a lot of variance in between where your rankings usually are compared to what we see from like the mainstream media. And I haven't seen where, most of the hits or misses technically are, but obviously you've been doing this for quite some time now. So I definitely appreciate having you on and your personal experience on some of these matters. And maybe we'll be able to catch up and do it a little bit later on in the season when you have a few more people under your belt. But I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Dion. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And the thing about scouting is the reason why they got 15, 16 guys in the department is there's more players than there is time. So it's just that'll give me some more chance to look at some of these guys, because every article you see me write out there, it's about between 6 and 8 hours on each one of those 3-minute reads. And so it is a tremendous amount of work that I love. have always loved, will always probably love for the rest of my life. So I know I would really appreciate the chance to come back on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show tonight. It's been fun. It's funny because tonight I was a little bit tired, but it's like because I've been up since 6 o'clock this morning watching film. But once we start talking ball, it's like wow, hey, it's like a second wind. It's like people are like, what's he drinking over there? Energy drinks? No, actually, but I mean, it's been fun. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and also thank you to our listeners tonight as well. It's been a lot of fun talking ball and talking New York Jets.
Yeah, 100%. As he mentioned, Daniel Kelly is a writer for SI Jets, so make sure you guys go check him out. He's had plenty of recent articles, as he's mentioned, a lot of time invested there, but they've definitely been good reads. So again, appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to what we have in the future.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Dion, and thank you again to our listeners. And I tell you what, go Jets. This is an amazing fan base with the New York Jets, a loyal fan base that deserves the Vince Lombardi trophy to come back to the home campus.
Yes, sir. That is the dream, and we are working on it. As he mentioned, thank you guys for tuning in and catching up. I'll link you guys to some of the stuff that he has in the description, and I hope everybody has a good night.
Peace. Take care. Good night.